Okay, super. Let's get started then. So today we're going to be talking about upgrading to Drupal 8, and I'll be going through some of the benefits and also some of the gotchas or some of the challenges that you might run into. So I know everyone's excited about Drupal 8 and there's tons of great things, but I also want to be realistic and talk about some of the things you might run into along the way. Just to introduce myself, my name is Suzanne Dergachova, and I work here at Evolving Web. I'm the co-founder, and I also do a lot of site building and theming, and I do Drupal training as well. If you haven't heard of Evolving Web before, we're a Drupal consulting and development shop, and we also have a Drupal training program. You can find us at evolvingweb.ca. We do projects for lots of different types of organizations, universities, stores, government, big corporations, healthcare, kind of all different types of projects. And our training program is pretty active. Right now we have a bunch of training lined up. In New Orleans at DrupalCon, we're going to be doing a training for project managers. We have some trainings coming up in Ottawa, Atlanta, Chicago, and we're going to Calgary for the first time at the end of May. There's also a Drupal conference coming up in Montreal, Drupal North. So if you're here in Montreal, you can come and take some training there and learn more about Drupal. So we hope to see you at one of these trainings or one of these Drupal events. So to start off today, I'm going to be running through a lot of the benefits that you'll find with upgrading to Drupal 8. And these also apply, of course, to new websites in Drupal 8. So if you're using Drupal for the first time, these are some of the features that you'll find that are built into Drupal. So we're really excited about this because Drupal 8 has been a while in coming. But if you're new to Drupal, I think you'll find that some of these features are really exciting and really motivating to work on a Drupal project. So to start off, a lot of the new features that you'll notice right away are part of the content authoring experience. So even just going and creating a blog post or page in Drupal 8 is a really improved experience over Drupal 7. And one of the first things you'll see when you create a new piece of content is that the layout of the node editing page has changed quite a bit. So in Drupal 7, we just had a single column layout with one field after the next. And in Drupal 8, we have this 2-column layout. So it's a bit easier to see the settings on the right side of the page. And the page is also a bit more condensed this way. You also have easier access to the links for publishing content and unpublishing content. So rather than having to go hunt down the publish checkbox, you just see it right there at the bottom of the page. We also have a WYSIWYG editor built into Drupal 8 core. So for the first time, Drupal has a WYSIWYG editor out of the box. And this editor is the CK editor. So it's an editor that a lot of people were already using in Drupal 7, but it comes with Drupal 8. And you'll see when you create content that the editor is already enabled and that you have a bunch of buttons there at the top of your body text so you can format the content and it'll be writing HTML for you behind the scenes. The nice thing about the CK editor module is that it really allows you to customize the editor experience. So you'll see the set of buttons there, but if you want to change them, if you want to add a button or take one away, you can go into the configuration settings for your Drupal site and change what those buttons are. So you kind of have a WYSIWYG editor for your WYSIWYG editor. The WYSIWYG editor also allows you to insert images into your text, so you don't have to use any extra module for this. So you can go ahead and insert images right into the body. And you can resize them, add an alt text, all of that is built in. There's also a new module for Drupal 8 called Quick Edit, and this allows you to edit text from the front end of your Drupal site. So you don't have to actually click on the Edit tab or go and look at the content overview page and hunt down that content. You will have a link to quick edit your content right from the front end. So just by hovering over the text and clicking on a link, you can change that text wherever it is on the page. And this is a tool that you can turn off. So if you're a Drupal super user and you find this tool not to your liking, you can turn off quick edit. The content overview page is another great thing for the content authoring experience. I think it's something that all authors and site administrators will really appreciate. This page in Drupal 7 was a bit tricky to use because you had to just use the built-in filters and you had to reset them. They didn't always work as people wanted. And so now with Drupal 8, this content overview page is built using views. And so it's a nice table of content, and the filters at the top are really easy to use. You can also do operations on your content in bulk. So that little drop down that says with selection, that allows you to delete all your content, publish, unpublish, or update your content in bulk. So again, in Drupal 7, we had to use the Views Bulk Operations module for this, and with Drupal 8, it's built into core. So those are the things you'll notice right away as a content author, but if you're a site builder, there's a whole other set of features that you'll find just a little bit further down into the Drupal site configuration. First of all, there's just a lot of user improvements, user interface improvements for site builders. So things like adding fields are a lot easier. You don't have to figure out that form on the Manage Fields page and what it means and which parts to fill out. There's just a single link for adding a field, and it takes you through the steps of setting up a new field on your content types. There's also a nicer translation UI. So if you're working on a multilingual site and you have to translate a lot of text through the Drupal interface, you now have this interface that allows you to translate multiple strings all at once. So if you're trying to edit any text with the word node, you can just search for that and it'll find you all the matches. You can put in your translations and save them all at once. The Drupal admin UI is also now responsive, so you can edit content on your phone or your tablet, and you can even configure your site. So I've actually done this. I've gone and edited a view while I was on a bus at the airport in Toronto. So if you're ever in a site building emergency and you need to make a quick fix on your site, it is possible now to edit your site on your phone. Although you should always test these changes, of course, in your staging or testing environment before you just do them on your live site. Small UX improvements. So, there's a lot of big changes to Drupal 8, but there's also a lot of little things that just make it a joy to use. So things like on the modules page, which is now called Extend, we have our huge list of modules, and we also have a little filter up at the top. So if you want to find a module really quickly, you can just type in the name of the module there, and you'll find it right away. So in Drupal 7, some people used the filter module filter module to add this feature, but now in Drupal 8, it's just built into core. There's also some improvements in terms of editing menus and taxonomy terms. So I don't know if you ever ran into this, but in Drupal 7, a lot of the times you'd click on edit menu and you'd just be taken to this page where you could edit the name of your menu. And now in Drupal 8, these things actually link to what you expect. So if you click edit menu, you'll see a list of your menu items. So we also in Drupal 8 have a bunch of improvements to the multilingual system. And this is something that we got really excited about here in Montreal because most of our projects involve multilingual websites. So one of the first things you'll notice, even before your Drupal site is in place, as you're installing it, you'll see that you can choose a language other than English in which to do the installation. So it's actually the first thing that you get to choose when you're installing Drupal. And this is great for websites, especially that need to be in a language other than English, because you can get those translations right off the bat for your new site, and you can install your site in such a way that it's already set up to be in the language of your choice. So the languages module will be enabled, and you can go ahead and add content in that language and add all your configuration in that language. So it really makes setting up a website in a different language pretty straightforward. There are also 4 modules now in Drupal core for a multilingual website. So we have configuration translation, content translation, interface translation, and then the language module. And so that language module is what lets you install languages other than English. And then the other 3 modules allow you to translate different elements of Drupal. So we have content translation, which is for translating anything that Drupal considers content. So nodes, taxonomy terms, blocks, menu items, interface translation, and configuration translation. So these allow you to translate more of the user interface of Drupal. And the way that these modules work, unlike in Drupal 7, where translating different elements, there were different modules that were used and the translation was kind of handled always in a different way. With Drupal 8, it's much more consistent. So this whole system of translating Drupal has become much more streamlined. And so when you're editing any type of content, again, menu items, nodes, blocks, these kinds of things, it's always using the same content entity translation system. And if you're translating config entities, so in Drupal 8, this is a new thing, config entities, things like vocabularies, content types, block types, menus, views, these are also all translated using the same system. So it does make things a lot more consistent and reliable. So we're not depending on contributed modules to fill in all the holes that Drupal 8 doesn't translate. It basically lets you translate everything. So you'll see a lot of translate links if you turn these modules on next to everything in Drupal 8, content and configuration. And so, like I said, this is one of the really big changes in Drupal 8, and I think it will really encourage people to use Drupal in places where multilingual websites are the norm. And so if you want to find out more about all the changes, you can go to Drupal8multilingual.org. And just a huge shout out to everyone who contributed to this project, Gabor and his team, for the Drupal 8 multilingual initiative. So multilingual Drupal, this is great for people with multilingual websites, but whatever type of website you have, you're going to be using different content types and different field types. So field types were something that we used in Drupal 7, and you often had to download a lot of different modules to get different types of fields. So if you wanted to add an event content type, for example, you'd have to download the date module to get date field. And this always seemed like it should be a standard thing. Dates are pretty common for content, and you had to download this module. Well, now it comes with Drupal core, along with a whole set of other field types, like entity references, links, even phone numbers. You can build these fields with Drupal core. So if you go to your extend page in your new Drupal 8 website, you'll see a list of all these field types. So it's not an exhaustive list. You will still have to download modules for other types of fields, like a location field, for example, or an address field. So there's an address field module already, and the geolocation field module is already available for Drupal 8. And there will be certainly more modules for other field types. But to build out pretty basic Drupal website, you probably won't need any other modules for field types. Contact forms in core. So related to field types allow you to add different content types, but in Drupal 8, we also have a lot more sophisticated contact forms built into core. And so you can create contact forms that have different fields, and all of these fields, you can use the field types that are built into Drupal 8 to build out your contact forms. So contact forms aren't totally separated from content types. All those fields that you can apply to your content types, you can also apply to your contact forms. And the interface for managing those fields is similar. So you have a manage fields interface for each form that you can use to create new fields and organize the display of your fields. So you can there will still be modules to extend contact forms in Drupal 8, but you can really do a lot with what's in core. A couple things that are missing, so a couple gotchas about the contact forms. You might be really happy with the forms and you launch your new site using core contact forms and you think you're all set. But a couple things that are missing are email formatting and having responses built into the website. So if you are using the contact form module and you get a submission to the form and it's sent to your email address, it's going to come out formatted something like this. So not the most beautiful display. So this is something you might have to customize using a custom module, or I'm sure there will be a contributed module for this that comes out. Also for responses, so for gathering the submissions to the form, if you were using the web form module in Drupal 7, there was always a tab that listed all the submissions to the form. Now in Drupal 8, with the contact form module in core, we don't have that, but there is a module called contact storage that provides this functionality. So another thing that's much improved in Drupal 8 is the block management system. We still have blocks in Drupal 8, and the blocks configuration page doesn't look drastically different. But we do have a couple really nice new features, one of which is the ability to create multiple instances of your blocks. So in Drupal 7, when you placed a block somewhere, that's where it was positioned. So if it was in the sidebar, it always kind of had to be in the sidebar. And now in Drupal 8, we can place blocks into different regions. And so you can have a block that's positioned maybe in the header on the home page and in the sidebar on the search page. So you can really create more variety in your layouts. So that might look something like this, where you have the search form appearing in 2 different locations on the page. Another thing that we get with the built-in block system is that we can create menu blocks that don't necessarily start at the first level of the menu. So to do this in Drupal 7, we had to use the menu block module, and now in Drupal 8, this is built in. So if you wanted to make a menu that shows the second level of the main navigation, you can just create a new instance of that menu block and maybe put it in the sidebar and set it to start at the second level of the menu. So in Drupal core, we still just have blocks configuration. We don't have panels and context yet. If you're expecting like a nice, beautiful drag and drop blocks page with the layout of your site displayed there and the ability to create different layouts in core, this isn't quite possible yet, but we still have the panels and the context modules. Context has an alpha release that came out last week that I haven't had a chance to test yet. And panels isn't quite ready yet, but these modules are coming soon, so it's something to look for. So one of the biggest additions to the Drupal site building kind of tool set is that now we have views in core. So when you're creating a Drupal 8 module, you don't have to download views, and you don't have to go to the work of customizing all the admin pages on the site. These things are already built with views because views is in core. So this leads to lots of advantages, and I think it'll really lead to the adoption of Drupal 8 more quickly than Drupal 7. So it took people a while to start using Drupal 7, in part because views wasn't quite ready when Drupal 7 came out. So you can create your Drupal 8 site and start making views for it right away. There are, of course, views plugin modules that you might want to use. So things like Views Slideshow. There's lots of other modules that people use with views, things like the calendar module. There's the Views accordion module. There's countless modules that integrate with views to make your list of content appear in a more interesting way. And not all of these plugins are ready yet. So I'm sure that there's a bunch that are ready that I'm missing from this slide. But basically, it's just something to look for when you're doing your upgrade. Just because views is ready, it doesn't mean that all the other views modules you're using are going to be ready as well. Benefits for users. So there's lots of things that make your life as a site builder easier when you're creating a Drupal site, but there's also things that are just beneficial for everyone using the site, including your end users. So things like accessibility. This is something you might not even notice when you're using Drupal 8, but there are lots of accessibility improvements that have gone into the project. So one example are way area tags. So these provide information about the role of different elements on the page. So it makes it better for screen readers so that they're aware of what's more important on the page, what's the navigation, what's the header, what's the content. There's also HTML5 built into the core template. So this is great for making the markup of the page more semantic. And this is an improvement also for search engine optimization. Alt tags in Drupal 8 are required by default. So this is something you'll probably notice if you go in and create an article on your new site. The alt tag for the image field is required, as well as the alt tags for images that you're inserting into your WYSIWYG editor. You can customize this, so if there's an image field for which you don't need alt tags, you can turn it off. But the nice thing is that it's required by default, so most sites will have alt tags for all the images. There was also an effort in Drupal 8 to make the CK editor more accessible. And so CK editor was brought into Drupal, but there were some improvements made there. Labels in Drupal 8 on content type fields can be visually hidden. So you might have a field where you don't need the label to be there for someone to make sense of the page or of the content when they're viewing it, but it might be better for a screen reader to have that label there, so you can set the label to be visually hidden instead of just completely hidden. And there's more information that you can find on these accessibility improvements on the Open Concept blog. So Mike Gifford of Open Concept has written a series of blog posts about these improvements. I think there's more to come in that series, so you can check that out at openconcept.ca. One just caveat to all of this, there are accessibility improvements to Drupal 8, but it doesn't magically mean that your Drupal 8 website will be accessible. So users who are adding content to your site will still be able to add content that's not accessible. If they're using the WYSIWYG editor or if they're writing HTML by hand, if they're creating tables, or if they're just inserting images into the HTML manually, they might add an image without an alt text. So it doesn't mean that you don't have to watch out and train your content authors about accessibility. Performance. So Drupal 8, we are all expecting to be this amazing, like a brand new car, like something you're excited to use that goes super fast. And there are a lot of performance improvements for Drupal 8. So you'll notice that out of the box, CSS and JavaScript aggregation are turned on, and this is to encourage people to use that aggregation. There's no JavaScript loaded for anonymous users by default, so even jQuery is not automatically loaded on the page unless you add it in your theme. The entity cache module is now in core, so this allows some extra caching of entities. Cache tags are allowed for more granular cache clearing. So this means if you're updating a certain piece of content or configuration, the cache can be cleared just for certain elements on the page and not for the entire page. There's no more overlay modules, so this means that when you're editing the site, your experience will be faster because the overlay module in Drupal 7 did slow things down. And so this is a screenshot from some of the performance testing we did when we upgraded our site to Drupal 8, and things were much improved by the CSS and JavaScript compression and the page caching. So turning that on really reduced the number of requests on the page and sped up the loading time. So some gotchas. Drupal 8 core is bigger than Drupal 7. There is more code. And so even though it can be faster with caching turned on, it doesn't mean that it's just inherently more performant. And so this is something that you'll still have to watch for and make sure that you do testing to make sure that your site's running quickly. And so we still recommend using memcache and varnish as part of your deployment to make sure that your site is properly cached. And another thing you'll just have to watch for in development is that you'll need to have a local settings file to turn off caching and aggregation in your development environment. Because it's turned on by default, this is great for your live site, but if you're developing a custom theme or adding modules, you'll want to turn those things off. So under the hood, so Drupal 8 is looking good for your users and for site builders, but what about those of us creating custom themes and modules for Drupal? So what's changed? What can we expect? So one of the most exciting things for, I guess, for site builders and for developers is configuration management built into Drupal 8. And configuration management allows us to synchronize configuration between different installations of Drupal. So if you're running a live Drupal site, you might also have a development environment and a testing environment. And you want to be able to change the configuration of the site in development and move it over to your testing and your live environment. And in Drupal 7, we had to use sort of a combination of things. Most people used the features module to do this, to move configuration over to the production site. There's also other modules that went along with that, like StrongArm. And these modules worked okay, but there were always some issues. And now in Drupal 8, this functionality is built into core. So the part of it that's built into core is that if you want to synchronize the configuration, so have the same configuration on your development site and on your live site, this works really well. And so how you do this is you'd configure your development site, all of the information about the configuration can be exported to YAML files where the configuration is defined. And then these can be moved over to other versions of your site. And this is done using UUIDs, so universal unique identifiers, to make sure that the configuration is the same. And then how you'd keep your site up to date is that you take the files and the content from your live site and move that back down to your dev site, just to make sure that you're always keeping things consistent. So you know how the changes in configuration are going to affect the new content and the new files. And so this works really well for this situation where you have, 2 or 3 environments where you want the configuration to be the same. The thing that this doesn't quite cover are situations where you want to package configuration. So if you have, let's say, 500 live sites, maybe you're a university or you're a big enterprise with a lot of similar websites, maybe you want to move some changes from your development environment to the live environment, but you want to package it together and you maybe only want to distribute it to certain environments. So maybe you want to deploy a new blog section of your site and just deploy that configuration. And so that's something that's a bit harder to manage with configuration management. So there is still going to be a features module for Drupal 8, and so you can check out that on drupal.org/project/features. And I think the developer has written a blog post about what those changes are going to be. I think you can find a link to that there. There's also a lot of front-end improvements that you'll find in Drupal 8. So if you're a theme developer or you're the one writing the CSS and JavaScript for your site, this should be pretty exciting. So Drupal 8 now comes with the Twig templating system. And Twig is a really nice templating system because you're not writing PHP, you're writing using the Twig syntax. So it's a little bit simpler. It's also more limited in that you can't write PHP code writing your template, and you can't do database calls writing your template. And so this is a great thing for, just in general, the security of Drupal websites and making Drupal themes more maintainable. It's also now easier to load CSS and JavaScript conditionally into your theme using libraries. So you can create libraries for different contexts of your site and only load JavaScript and CSS when you need to. There's a Twig debug tool built into Drupal that allows you to see which templates are being loaded on any given page. So if you turn this on, you can inspect the source of your page, and you'll see printed out in comments in the HTML which templates are used to load which sections of the HTML. So this makes it a lot easier to figure out which templates to override in your theme, and it makes the whole theming experience a lot better. There's still the devel module, so you can still use this to inspect variables, but along with the Twig debug tool, this really adds to our toolkit for Drupal themers. There are 2 new modules in Drupal core that you can extend, stable and classy, and these make it easier to create custom themes with Drupal. And the stable theme is a very basic theme that just provides basically Drupal core with very limited markup and classes. And the classy theme is classy because it adds additional classes and IDs that you might need to style different elements on your Drupal site. So classy is something that you can extend with a custom theme if you want more classes available to use in your CSS. If you're really minimalistic and you want the most basic version of Drupal possible, then you can extend the stable theme. There are also some base themes coming out for Drupal 8. I haven't done an exhaustive research on this, but the Bootstrap theme is what we're using for evolvingweb.ca, and it's in pretty good state, so I recommend trying that out. There's also back-end improvements for Drupal 8, and these are extensive, so we could do a whole webinar just on this. But basically, Drupal 8 is now based on Symfony, and it uses object-oriented programming. It has more consistent handling of entities for translation of content and configuration. So what I mentioned earlier for the improvements in the multilingual system, this has a big impact on how Drupal is written behind the scenes. There's a lot of new developer tools for Drupal 8. There's the Drupal console, which I recommend trying out. There's the Drupal module upgrader, which helps you upgrade modules from 7 to 8. And people are also really starting to use PHP Storm more now that Drupal 8 is coming out. So if you want to be doing debugging, I really recommend PHP Storm as an IDE. So some things just to watch for. Drupal 8 requires PHP 5.5.9 or higher. So just make sure when you're thinking of using Drupal 8 that for your development environment and your live environment, you're going to need to have this version of PHP installed. Drupal 8 does use object-oriented programming, so if you're not familiar with OOP, it's something to learn. The code has changed significantly for themes and modules, especially modules, and so there will be work to do to upgrade your modules. The module upgrader is not going to magically do all this work for you. It will be a significant effort. And there's also a lot of contributed modules that haven't been upgraded yet. So for example, if you're upgrading your site, there might be some work that you have to do to upgrade those modules yourself. So speaking of contrib, Drupal 8 core has been released, but there are probably lots of contributed modules you're using if you're using Drupal 7. And so this is something to really consider when you're looking at the upgrade process. So are you using contributed modules? Of course you are. The question is probably more, how many are you using and which ones are ready to use yet in Drupal 8? So if you go on Drupal.org, you can find some information about this for the various modules. And of course, you have to do some testing when you're using a Drupal 8 module, just to make sure that it's ready. So if there's an alpha release ready or a beta release, you'll want to really test it before you're using it on your site to make sure it's meeting all your needs and that it's working the way you expect. So we have a short blog post about this on our website that you can check out. There's a link here at the bottom of the screen, and this just provides a little bit of information about themes and modules we used when we upgraded our website to Drupal 8. But this is changing every day. So since I wrote these slides, the modules that are available for Drupal 8 have already changed. So it's something that you can keep on top of by checking out the information on Drupal.org. Now, if you're using a distribution, you might have to wait a little longer. So Drupal distributions are versions of Drupal that have modules and configuration and sometimes a theme already in place. And so if you're using a distribution for Drupal 7 and it relies on a lot of contributed modules, it might take a while for that distribution to get upgraded. And even if it does get upgraded, the migration path might not be smooth because the changes might be quite significant. And so you can you can start, looking at these distributions for Drupal 8, but there aren't too many available yet. So at last count, there were 31 that had some kind of release for Drupal 8 on Drupal.org. And so, for example, for those of you in Ottawa using the WetKit distribution, it does rely on a lot of modules, and not all of these have been upgraded yet. So there is still going to be quite some time before this distribution would be released. The upgrade process. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about what it takes to upgrade Drupal. And this is from our experience. And I'll talk a little bit about issues that we've run into and challenges that we've faced here at Evolving Web. So the upgrade process, initially what you're going to do is create your new Drupal 8 site, install whatever modules you need that you find, contributed modules or custom modules, and you're going to configure your site. So there's some configuration that you're going to start off with. And then you're going to look at content. So if you already have a Drupal 6 site or a Drupal 7 site, you're going to look at what content you want to migrate from 6 to 7, or sorry, from 6 to 8, or from 7 to 8. And unlike previous versions of Drupal, where there was an upgrade script that you could run to upgrade your database from one version of Drupal to the next, with Drupal 8, we are using the migrate module. So migrate allows you to transfer content and configuration from Drupal 6 or 7 to Drupal 8. And so, for example, with the upgrade of evolvingweb.ca, we wanted to migrate the blog posts from our Drupal 7 site into our Drupal 8 site. So we wanted to preserve all of that content. But often with an upgrade process, you'll also want to create new content. So upgrading is an opportunity to rewrite content or add new content to your site, or just restructure that content. And so we didn't have all the content on the Drupal 7 site. We also wanted to create a bunch of new content. So what we did is we created a Drupal 8 content staging site, so just a brand new Drupal 8 site with all the new content that we wanted to add. And then we did a migration from that Drupal 8 site to our brand new Drupal 8 site. So we kind of had two sources that we were pulling from, our previous Drupal 7 site, and then this content staging site that we created. And so your upgrade process might look different. You might be migrating a lot more from your previous site. You might be migrating more content types. You might also want to migrate your configuration, so maybe some of your content types or your views or other elements that you have in Drupal 7 or Drupal 6. So it kind of depends on the type of upgrade you want to do and how much you want to preserve from your previous website. So I have a link here in the slides, and I'll put the slides up in a blog post after this webinar. But this link is to a presentation we did about the upgrade of evolvingweb.ca, so you can get some more information about that process. So to talk a little bit more in general about Drupal 8 Migrate and how it works, basically Drupal 8 has the Migrate module built into core, and it allows you to migrate content and configuration from Drupal 6 or 7 to Drupal 8. So this works quite differently from the Migrate module for Drupal 7, which just worked with content. And so you can find more information about this on Drupal.org, about how Drupal 8 Migrate works and how to customize it. One thing that does take a lot of work is to figure out what you actually want to, what you want to migrate and what you don't. And so to customize this, it takes a little bit more work than just wholesale migrating everything you have to Drupal 8. And so some things to watch for in terms of migrate. There won't be a migration path for everything on your site. So if something's in Drupal core, that's going to migrate. But if you have a lot of contributed modules, there might be content or configuration that doesn't get migrated. You might also run into some problems with multilingual content. So that's something that we had to resolve on our site. We added some patches to Drupal for migrate for the multilingual content migration to resolve some of those issues. You can customize what you want to migrate using the migrate manifest module. And so this allows you to specify whether you want to migrate all the configuration or just certain elements. You'll have more flexibility doing the migration if you use Drush, because the UI for migrate only allows you to do so many things. So we did have to customize our migration process a little bit. And some of those things that we had to do is change how multilingual content entities were migrated. We had to change the migration so that we were only copying the files we needed, because not all the files in the file system were required on the new site. We had to do some custom work to migrate paths and redirects. We had to add HTTP auth to our migration so that it was more secure. And we had to import PO files to import our new custom translations. So that was also something we had to customize. And in terms of all of these things that I'm listing here, I know this is a brief summary, but we are hoping to do a series of blog posts on this work that we did. And so you can just stay tuned on our blog, and we'll definitely have some posts coming up soon. In terms of the upgrade process, so like I said, that there's a lot of work to do to upgrade depending on how customized your site is. And so there's some tools that you might want to use as part of this process. First of all, when we did our upgrade, we wrote a script that would run the upgrade so that we could test it. So it's not something that you just do once, it's something that you do and then you test to see if all the content and configuration is working together, and then you want to be able to run it again because there's definitely going to be things that don't work. So we wrote a series of bash scripts that run the migration. That run the migrations, that install the site, basically that do all the steps that you do that I listed in this previous slide. We also used a tool called SiteDiff for testing, and you can find this tool on GitHub. Basically, it's a tool that allows you to compare an old site to a new site. So if you have a Drupal 7 site and you want to do this upgrade and you want to make sure that all your pages are still in place, then you can use SiteDiff to test all those URLs to make sure that at least all those pages still exist. It's also going to show you differences between the HTML on those pages. So if you want to do an upgrade and you actually want the site to be exactly the same, it'll also show you differences between markup. Although I warn you, you're going to have a lot of differences between 7 and 8. So making a new Drupal 8 site that's identical might not be worth the effort. We also used Behat for integration testing. So this is to make sure that when the site is launched, Behat actually launches the site in a browser and makes sure that certain elements are in place or that certain links work. And so this is very useful for upgrading, just to make sure that things are working like you expect. And finally, we use Docker for deployment. So this allowed us to have a development environment and a production environment and a staging environment that were identical. So Docker allows you to deploy a site, spin up a new environment very, very easily. And it allows you to track changes to environments. So it's a nice deployment tool to use. And if you want more information about all these kind of upgrade tools and testing tools, and actually more tools that I haven't had a chance to mention, our developer Dave Vasilevsky did a talk at MidCamp, and there's a link up here. You can go to midcamp.org and search for it. He did a talk called Test-Driven Drupal Upgrade, so you can check that out. So that's all the content I have for you today. There's time for questions, so if you have things that you want to ask, there's a chat, or actually there's a QA panel, so I'm gonna go there and make sure I'm answering all your questions. You can also, if you're interested just in more information about using Drupal 8, we have some trainings coming up that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. So you can find more information about those trainings at evolvingweb.ca/training/upcoming. And there's a listing of all the trainings there, including trainings in Ottawa, Atlanta, Chicago, Calgary, and in Montreal, we'll be doing some training at Drupal North. So I'll go and check out if we have any questions. Okay, there's a great question here from Kay Singh, who asks, can you associate CSS with a block? So you can associate CSS with a block by attaching it. So if you're writing, say, a pre-process function in your theme, you can attach CSS that way. And the way that I would recommend doing it, it's using a library. So with Drupal 8 in the theme, there's a file called, say the theme's called my theme, it would be mytheme.libraries.yaml, and in there you can define different libraries. So you could define a library for your custom block, and then you can associate that with the block in a preprocess function for the block. So there's an attached or attachments variable or property that you can define, and you can add different libraries to that. You can use the devel module to figure out exactly what variables are available there. Does anyone else have questions? I don't know if everyone can see the Q&A tab. I'll just give you a few minutes to think. Oh, I see there's actually some questions in the chat. So I'll take a look at those. So one question is the email field part of core, or is it a contributed module? So I believe that it is part of core. So you could use it, for example, in your contact forms. If you want to ask somebody for an email address, you can add an email field there and have them fill that in. There's also a question about migrating sites from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. So I think I covered that kind of at the end of my talk. And like I said, there will hopefully be some blog posts coming up to give more detailed information about that. Anonymous viewer asks, is there a way of bulk exporting and then importing the strings to be translated by freelancers? Oh, that's a great question. So there's, in Drupal 7 and in Drupal 8, you can export and import PO files, which store the translations, and basically it provides a list of text to be translated, and you can edit these files using a lot of different translation software, and so your translators will probably be able to use those. Or there is a module called TMGMT, the Translation Management Tools, I think it's called. That's TMGMT, and this provides a sort of separate interface for translating Drupal elements. So it's going to include content and configuration. And I'm not sure exactly what the status of that is for Drupal 8 yet, but that's definitely a module to watch. Okay, more info on the configuration file to turn off CSS aggregation for development purposes. Yeah, so that I quickly mentioned that CSS and JavaScript aggregation is turned on by default, and there's also caching that's turned on by default in Drupal 8. And so to make sure that you can still develop your site with those things turned off so that you can see your CSS and JavaScript changes right away. There is a file, it's under, I believe it's under sites default. And it's called, there's one called, it's your local settings file. And then there's another one called your development settings file. And these are I believe these are YAML files. Yes, these are YAML files. And so you can replace, or you can refer to, actually might be better to refer to the development settings file in your settings file, and that way you can use settings that are more appropriate for a development environment. So if there's no other questions, I think we'll wrap up the webinar. And thanks all for attending. So I'm going to send up a follow-up email with a link to the recording in case I think some of you joined halfway through. And I'll also add some useful links related to some of your questions. And stay tuned to our blog for more detailed information about upgrades and migration, and hopefully we'll be able to do more webinars like this in the future. So thanks everyone, have a great day.